Hi guys, this is your lecture for October 27th. Today we're going to be looking at pages 99 through 106. We're going to be talking about adding flavor and we're starting chapter 10. Okay, so to add flavor, when you're cooking, you're going to probably use herbs, spices, or seasonings. And it's important to recognize that there is a difference between those three. Herbs are the leaves and stems of aromatic plants. So examples of that would be basil, oregano, rosemary, mint. Spices are the buds, bark, roots, flowers, seeds, etc. of select plants. So garlic, cinnamon, poppy seed, ginger. And the seasonings are mixtures that can include any combination of herbs, spices, and salt. They're all good for cooking. They just add different flavors to cooking. And you're going to want to store them properly in order for them to be used for as long as possible and to have the most intense flavor. So the important thing to remember is that you're going to keep herbs and spices and seasonings in a cool, dry place away from heat, light, and moisture. So generally in a cabinet. Whole dry herbs, when stored properly, can retain optimum flavor for a year. Ground herbs lose flavor after about 6 months. So it's important to remember that when you're buying things like herbs, spices, and seasonings, to bear in mind how long their flavor lasts so that you don't buy too much of it and end up with a whole bunch of leftovers that don't have a stronger taste and aren't as good for cooking. Seasoning will also begin to change flavor after about 6 months. And then, of course, fresh herbs are going to have the shortest lifespan for flavor, and that's going to be about 1 to 2 weeks if stored properly. And to store them properly, you're going to want to trim their stems at a 1/2 inch and put them in water. And you're going to also want to make sure they're refrigerated. There's other ways to store it, but basically you want to keep them cool and have moisture with them and refrigerate them. Okay, so to maximize flavor of herbs, you're going to want to cut or snip the fresh herbs. You might, if you're using dried herbs, you're going to want to crumble or grind them. That's the same for spices. There's certain seeds in some spices that have the maximum flavor if you toast them, so you might want to toast them. When substituting fresh herbs for dried herbs, you're going to want to use 3 to 4 times as much because dried herbs are more potent than fresh herbs. But remember, too much of any herb or spice can make the food taste bitter. But it is fun to experiment, so feel free to experiment when you're cooking. Just make sure that you go a little bit at a time as far as adding spices and that you taste test. Okay, so what about marinades? Because marinades also add flavor when you're cooking. And what is a marinade? Well, a marinade is a wet mixture, usually containing an acid such as vinegar, lemon juice, or soda. It also contains oil and herbs and spices. And its purpose is twofold. It's going to add flavor and it's going to tenderize meat. Foods can be marinated for as little as 15 minutes for up to as long as 24 hours. And the procedure is very similar, whether or not you're going to let it sit for 15 minutes or whether you're going to let it sit for 24 hours. And basically, you're going to take the food, and again, this is going to be raw meat, so be careful. And you're going to marinate it in a glass or plastic container or a zip-top plastic bag. You don't want to use metal containers. Metal actually interferes with the marinade and can change the flavor. But you're going to put the food and the marinade in the glass plastic container or zip-top plastic bag. Make sure you stir or turn or flip the food 2 to 3 times during the marinating process just so that all sides of the meat has an opportunity to be exposed to the marinade. And if you wish to use the remaining marinade after you finish as a sauce, make sure you boil it for 1 minute for safety reasons because remember it was in contact with raw meat. All right, let's talk about legumes. Legumes are excellent form of nutrition. They have colossal dietary value, and it's also something that can add flavor to your cooking. But legumes are seeds that come from pots of plants, and they are commonly called beans, and they can be purchased in many forms: dried, canned, frozen, anything like that. So to cook legumes, you actually have a certain process. If you have dried beans, you actually have to rehydrate them. So the first step is to soak them. Some beans take longer to soak than others. It might be that you choose the overnight method to soak them overnight. It might be that you choose the quick soak method, and that's going to involve putting the beans in water and then boiling them for 2 minutes and then letting them sit for a couple of hours just to rehydrate. But after they've been rehydrated and you've soaked them, of course, which is the rehydration process, you're going to want to simmer to cook your beans. You don't want to do a rapid boil. If you do that, a rapid boil causes the beans to split, and they just don't look as pretty as if you just simmer them. To minimize foaming, because foaming does happen when you're cooking beans, you can add a tablespoon of vegetable oil, butter, or margarine. You can also add salt and acidic flavors to your legumes to make them more flavorful, but you want to do this at the end of the cooking time, because if you add it too early, it will prevent the beans from becoming tender, which is the whole point of cooking them. Dried beans store best in airtight containers in a cool, dry place. I have a typo there. I apologize. That should say cool. And you want to use them within a year. And you can store cooked beans in the fridge for about 2 to 3 days. But if you want to keep them for longer, then you need to freeze them, and they'll survive in the freezer for 6 months. Okay, let's talk about pasta. I'm sure that we have some pasta fans among us. Pasta ranges in size and color and even flavor. There's some pasta that's spinach flavored and tomato flavored. It just depends. But pasta has great nutritional value because it is wheat and it qualifies as a grain. It's generally low in calories, fat, and cholesterol, and it's usually enriched. Cooked pasta can actually be kept in the fridge for up to 5 days, and dried pasta can be kept for a year if stored well. You can even make fresh pasta at home if you wish. It's relatively easy to make, but it's also available at the grocery stores. Usually you would check for it in the refrigerated section because you need to keep it cool because it's something that's moist, and if it's not refrigerated, then it can develop mold and things like that. So you want to always make sure you refrigerate fresh pasta. Frozen pasta can be kept for up to 9 months, and you're definitely going to want to watch out for freezer burn when reconstituting frozen pasta, because freezer burn really takes a toll on the taste of anything that it touches. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fats and oils and frying, because we all know that fried food tastes awesome. But it's also should be a sometimes food. It's not always the best food for you. But fats and oils are essential to our diet. They provide energy, they provide cushion for body parts, and they also help distribute vitamins. Remember, there's some vitamins that are only fat soluble, so your body actually needs fat in order to absorb the vitamins. And we use fats and oils to fry foods. And when you use fats and oils, there's certain kinds that work best. It causes the food to brown, and it adds flavor. Fats and oils are also good for binding ingredients together. And when used in baked goods, fats and oils tenderize. So there's several different types of fat. There's solid fat. I guess I should say there's actually 2 types of fat. There's solid fats and there's liquid fats. But there's several types of fats within those categories. So examples of solid fats would include butter, lard, margarine, vegetable oil spreads, shortening. If you're interested to learn a little bit more about each of those, you can look at page 104 of your book. It goes into a little bit more detail about what distinguishes them. And then we have we have liquid fats, which would include vegetable oil, olive oil, cooking spray, things like that. Okay, so there's several different methods of frying. We have, well, let's just pause and just go over what frying means. So basically frying means to cook foods in hot oil. And we have pan frying, which is usually performed in a skillet on the stove top, and it uses a small amount of oil. We also have stir frying, which is usually a oriental method of cooking. And basically in that, you constantly stir the food while it's being cooked in a small amount of fat over high heat, which it tastes really good. I love stir-fried food. And then we have deep fat frying, and that's probably the one we're most familiar with because that's how we get French fries and that's how we get a lot of fast food. So basically with deep frying, uh, you're going to have a deep heavy saucepan with a wide opening and then a deep fryer with straight slots or an electric deep fryer. And you're going to actually submerge the food inside of the oil so it's completely covered. And that's how you, and then it, of course, is boiled in that, and then, or fried rather, is fried in the oil. And that's how you get deep fat fried food. It's important to note that some oils are better than others to use when frying. So peanut oil is one that's good for frying. Some oils are actually specifically labeled frying oil. So just look at that if you're in the store and if you're wanting to fry something. You're going to want to choose an oil with a mild flavor and a high smoke point. So what is a smoke point? A smoke point is the temperature at which a heated fat begins to smoke. And you don't really want that to happen. There's actually been research that inhaling the smoke from oils is bad for you, so you want to be careful with how you're cooking. So you also want to be careful with frying in general because you are going to be using oil, and I have a typo here. It should say fat. I don't know why I said fight. But fat is highly flammable, so be really careful when you're frying because you can accidentally start a grease fire. There's a couple of tips and techniques for deep fat frying on page 106 to 107 of your book if you're interested. But I want you to make sure that you watch your ed puzzle about putting out a hot oil fire or a grease fire. So the ed puzzle is called Kitchen Grease Fire Safety. It's really important that you know how to do this because you will be cooking and we want to make sure that you're doubly safe when you're cooking, particularly if you're cooking with oils, if something should happen and something should catch on fire. All right, thank you.